AI today is the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to be better. By the time our kids go to college, get into the workforce, it's only going to be better. Having said that, how do we prepare our kids to deal with that future? What is the thing that you want them to have?
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey Shiyan, really excited to have you back.
Super excited, Jeremy.
Uh.
2 shots of espresso excited.
Yeah, you just flew back from
I
the
just
States
landed.
this morning.
Yeah,
So very dedicated to this recording. So
I'm committed.
this is what a sleep deprived Shiyan sounds like. Hopefully it's perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got a little bit of sleep. I got like premium economy quality sleep.
Ooh, that's the best. That's a sweet spot. So today I think we want to talk about something which is interesting, right? Which is about the big headline is that Singapore youth has the highest unemployment or difficulty finding jobs as of today. So the statistic that came out was that in 2022, 94% of Singapore university graduates were employed. And for 2024, only 87% of fresh graduates are employed today. That being
This
said,
is 6 months after. What's the period?
this but within the first 6 months after graduation. And I think they also extended to 1 year effectively. And then for those who do find a job between 2022 to 2024, their monthly salary has grown from $4,200 to $4,500, which is growing by about 4+%, which is better than what inflation
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
So it's an interesting trend where those who do get jobs are getting better salaries, but there are more people who are not finding full-time jobs. We were discussing that, and we also see that ourselves in the industries and the companies we're looking at. So we want to talk a little bit about that. So, Jane, what do you think is going on?
Oh man, I think there's a macro thing too, which
Yeah.
is just I think 21, 22 people are hired a lot.
Yeah.
It's like the pandemic years where people were at home spending money in front of their computers, and I actually think that you're seeing like with the layoffs and people shedding jobs, some of that coming down. So there's some normalization, I think, post pandemic. So I think that could be one factor in it. I think the other one is of course AI, and I think it's a really interesting topic, right? Which is I had a friend tell me AI doesn't need a career path. AI doesn't need the weekend off. AI doesn't need compliments. And AI is a fraction of the cost of an analyst. So why do I need an analyst? But there's, I think, quite a lot of truth to some of those statements. And so I think that's like an interesting topic to explore a little bit around like if a lot of entry level jobs really were around research, slide prep, meeting prep, all that sort of stuff, what does it mean that your partner at a consulting firm, MD, VP at an investment bank, all the way down the line, can basically have those job functions done with the press of a button at a much lower cost and faster? First, I think for employment, but even beyond just getting a job, those were always thought of as apprenticeships, right? Like you're learning the craft from someone along the way. Everybody has to do that basic work to get up to that point where they can be a maker. So if you don't have those opportunities to learn the craft, how do you even become that person, right? So in the interim, the VP MDs are like, oh, awesome, press the button. But then let's say 10 years from now, like how do people get the requisite experience to go do those more senior level jobs? I think that's another question that I would love to explore further.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I definitely do see that for, I think, my friends' companies. And what's happening is that basically somebody says something like, okay, normally you need a junior level marketer or junior level person to do your market research, to understand something, debug something pretty simple. And now I'll say somebody with maybe several years experience or 5 or 10, they're just using ChatGPT or Claude to get it done. So to some extent, then the question is, wow, managing a human person to come in feels like it's more work. I'd rather hire somebody who has at least 3 to 5 years experience, who already has some of those workplace norms, and a little bit less risky than entry-level grad. Because a lot of entry-level graduates, they join and they don't feel motivated. There's a lot of training.
You don't know how to
can
do
tell.
anything.
Yeah.
When you graduate from college, I always tell people, same thing for me. When I graduated from college, what was I good at? I was really good at taking tests and doing homework, right?
Yeah.
My first job my associate like stood over my shoulder. I was like, that's not how you write a corporate email.
Yeah.
Like they basically train you to be a working professional.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can hire someone who has 3 or 5 years experience and who's really comfortable with agents and bots and like happy to teach themselves and give themselves leverage, then why do you need to hire more entry level people, right?
Yeah.
You don't. You actually get way more juice out of this person. And you're almost even willing to pay the person more
Yeah.
because they're saving you on headcount.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting because historically you would have had to have, say, 4 entry-level people and 1 middle manager managing those 4. And now you're like, maybe 1 manager person and 1 hungry person can cover the work of 4 people, these 5 people actually. In the context of, I think some fields, especially like marketing, is very impacted. Anything to do with writing or research.
It's not even that. My friend just hired a head of in-house counsel for her growth stage company. And it was specifically, the JD was specifically to find someone who was willing to figure out how to automate the legal department. They said, hey, what does a SaaS company legal department do? It's contracts, customer contracts, employment contracts, maybe some leases and things like that. But their perspective as a senior team was like, we don't want to go out and hire a ton of lawyers to scale with our business. We want to go hire a GC who is like willing and happy to use technology to basically look at our legal systems and build processes and bots basically that can handle that. So it's not just marketing. I think this is like impacting every aspect. I have a founder who's like, why do I need an engineering manager, a product manager? He's like, I am the product manager. I have full context in my head.
Yeah.
He's like, me and Claude, I tell Claude what I want. Claude generates the code. I review the code and I set the production.
Yeah.
I don't need another 6 people to have overhead and communication with.
Exactly. And I think that's the big part is that it's not just that the undergraduates have relatively low value add versus some experience, but managers don't really want to manage more because there's an overhead of communication, training, coaching. And why do you have to do all that stuff? You can just have a meaner team of AI and some people who are willing to use the AI as well.
Yeah. It is interesting though. So like I was chatting with a friend who's like a people leader at a $50-60 million company. She was saying historically it's been hard to find great talent in HR functions. And so you end up with this overhead of managing kind of middling. You have 1 or 2 really good and they have a bunch of middling.
Yeah.
And her initial hope was that she would teach them all to use AI and they would all level themselves up. And she's like, what's really annoying? She's like, that people who use AI are already my top performers.
Yeah.
And the rest are still, it's not actually elevating them. So it's not about tools, it's actually about attitude.
Right.
And I can't fix the like giving more tools can't fix the attitude. And so I think that is also something to think about because the sort of like happy version of the world is, hey, look, everyone has tools now. Everyone can go out and be like their own leader, founder, whatever it is. But then you have to deal with this question of like motivation, of like how much agency someone feels that drives to get things moving forward. And I can't fix.
Yeah. And I think that's a tricky part, right? Because I think there was a belief that AI would be a leveler for talent. And so everybody who's a low performer will become a better performer. But I think the issue that I think from the studies that are done on AI talent so far was that these were often looking at high performing companies. So they're looking at consultants in BCG and they were like, oh, high performers only get a small bump versus average or below performers in consulting get a large bump. But then you're like, wait a moment. Everybody in Boston Consulting Group is actually a pretty strong performer relative to the average population, right? A below average BCG person is effectively an above average person in the general white collar workforce. So yes, there's some graduation degree, but I think for a big chunk of the economy, they are not by nature, like maybe they're not a job they love, maybe they're not motivated, but also they're not motivated to learn AI. And then all of those combines to say, I don't really feel a need to catch up. And I think what we're really starting to see is that from the managers that I talk to, a lot of them are just saying these people are getting replaced by the better performers or the software tools are getting much better. And so there's some level of shedding of these folks. So I think it shows up as, I think, shedding, I think an invisible productivity improvement for, I would say, some years of experience of white collar jobs. But I think it's showing up as less jobs available for the youth that are graduating.
I think you've got little kids, I've got little kids, right? So I'm watching all this stuff go down and it's making me think, okay, AI today is the worst it's ever going to be, right? It's only going to be better.
Yeah, that's true.
By the time our kids go to college, get into the workforce, it's only going to be better. And having said that, how do we prepare our kids to deal with that future? What is the thing that you want them to have? And I think at the top of my list is agency, right? You actually have to teach people to be proactive and be like, oh, you want to do something? Okay, make a plan. Go do it. Don't wait for someone to tell you to do something. Like, how are you going to marshal resources and go do it? Because whatever we think of AI today is going to be way more capable in 10 years. We're just going to assume that you're going to figure out how to use it. But that mindset, I think that's something is going to be really important. One. I think two is part of agency and marshaling resources is you need to be able to talk to other people and convince them to do stuff with you. So I think there is this element of like, how do you get groups of people to work together? And what is your skill in like navigating other people's incentives and motivations, and like, how do you like get them oriented towards a goal? The third one is like a little bit harder, which is like the people who can best use AI are actually the people who have the most context, right? Because they can direct it more effectively. How do you decide what you should have context on? How do you decide what you should be deep in versus not? And maybe the answer is you don't pick, you just have to be really good at learning something. So that wherever you end up, you're really good at teaching yourself how to get deep in that thing, or deep in that you can go direct it. Those are my preliminary thoughts. How about you? Where are you landing on this with your kids?
I think that for the kids, they had to be, I think two more points on top of yours would be, one is they should be passionate about what they're doing. So the match is really important, because even not, I think there was a time in the past where you're just like, you don't like your job in corporate, but you just
Suck it up.
suck it up. And then so you're just like always at the average 50% mark, right? And I feel like average 50% performance in a world where the top performers can use AI to go really fast, I think that might work in your entry-level job, but I think that cumulative compounding effect will just let you basically lose your job in 5 years' time. So I think that's one piece. The other piece I think that's key actually is those jobs that are protected look pretty safe now. They look more safe. Like, what are things that AI is not allowed to fully displace in that sense? So marketers are not a protected class of occupation.
Yeah.
So you already see that whole marketing departments are getting fired because AI can basically do the whole output of the whole thing. But you're not allowed to use AI to replace, as of today, a doctor, a lawyer, a politician, right? An army general.
I think lawyers are going away.
I think that lawyers are facing a big trouble where, yes, I think a lot of the work that they use on the word side is getting automated because so much of the job is easily automated. I just think that at the end of the day, still, you will never see a robot lawyer in court for a long time. But that's my perspective. And so I do think that trial lawyers, for example, is going to be protected. And in fact, I will actually make the argument that because bots are going to do so much legal research, I think the cost of lawsuits is going to go down. I think the amount of lawsuits and the complexity of the lawsuits is going to go up by order of magnitude. And so I don't think you have those like normal lawyers with just documents. But I think you're like prosecutor, defender, very complicated billion-dollar page document case. I think that a lot more lawsuits will happen. So from my perspective, I think those are more protected occupations where I'm not saying that it isn't going to be affected by AI. It is affected by AI. But at some level, by law, by regulation, the technology has to feed through that layer, which is a law firm, a senior lawyer, a doctor, a politician. Like, it has to go through, right?
Yeah, it still ends up being the best of the best. But it is an interesting idea, which is, I don't know, little kids are always like sneezing, having rashes. I do take a lot of photos and then I upload them to ChatGPT. I'm like, what could this possibly be? And it's like, do I need to go to the doctor? And they always say, I am not a doctor, but probably heat rash. And I'm like, heat rash, that's fine. We don't need to go.
No, I think there's going to be a lot of efficiency throughout the entire system. And I'm going to say like medicine, law, all these things will all be impacted by AI. It's just that at least you know that by law, there is a job that can be there, right?
Yeah.
Because of how the system is built, right? So I'm just saying, at the end of the day, there are jobs that are more protected than other jobs.
Yeah. Passion is an interesting thing, though, which is like discover your passion, or how do you help someone discover their passion?
Can you imagine somebody is, my strength is document research and searching the web.
My strength is meme lord.
Meme lord. There's a tricky part, right? It's like the whole guy, that really doesn't exist in Japan. It only exists in the Western concept of Japan, which is like the things that I like to do, the things that society wants me to do, the things I'm getting paid to do, and the things that I'm good at. So that for library, then you can help your child, let's share the bullseye.
But I think this is the hard thing, which is you don't really know what you're good at. I think the idea of being good at something naturally is false. Like, most things require you to actually expend some effort to figure out, like, are you good at it? Right? You don't like, very few people are like prodigies day one. You're like, oh man, this person's like a brilliant XYZ thing, right? Like, it takes work, right? And so sometimes I think we overvalue passion because I don't feel passionate. But yeah, at the beginning of learning everything feels hard. That's just what it feels like. And so you have to push through that to get to the part where you're like, oh, this is fun. I don't know. I think about investing like that, right? Because investing is hard. There are moments where you're like, oh, this is really cool. I think I learned something. But then there are moments where you're like, I'm an idiot. How come I didn't see that? Or I didn't figure that out. And it's this constant process of like learning, mastery, realizing you're an idiot, learning, mastery, realizing you're an idiot. But you have to push through to get to that point because sometimes the beginning of learning about investing is like boring.
No, I agree with you. And I also, another part of it is as parents and kids is I'm doing a job that my parents could never have envisioned. This is my job didn't exist, right? I'm just saying like high growth, startup, biotech, COO. Parents will be like, the only part they understand is like COO, which is a manager, right? I think one interesting aspect about this conversation is that to some extent, our kids will have more time to adjust because we're watching this AI thing happen. But for the youth of this generation, it's like kind of a weird thing because normally when jobs are laid off, people normally lay off the old people first and replace them with cheaper, younger people who are hungrier, right? And so historically, it's not really youth unemployment that kicks off. It's normally the inverse, which is older people find it harder to.
Because they're more expensive.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's weird, I don't know, inverted.
Yeah, I think if you're graduating now and you thought you were going to be a marketer, how do you position yourself to not be replaced or subsumed, I guess, whatever the verb you want to use is. And I think that's like it's both like a hard question and an easy question, right? Because on the one hand, you're 22, you're probably really good at technology. You're actually very comfortable trying new things, whatever it is. But on the other hand, it's hard because you may not have a mental model for how marketing works yet. You might only have an academic perspective on it. You haven't actually worked in a company yet. So how do you start using those skills to actually help yourself get 1 foot forward? It actually reminds me of, do you remember during the great zero interest rate period where people like Uber were giving out like all those referral goodies? I had a bunch of colleagues who basically were setting up their own paid marketing campaigns to drive traffic to their Uber referral codes. And basically traffic in a moment before the company itself realized that their referral codes were being gamed. So the reason I bring that up is that there are actually lots of ways to use your skills in the real world that don't require employment. And so if you think of marketing as, hey, it is the discipline of finding customers, 4 Ps, product, price,
Base, promotion.
place, promotion. Yeah. But I think there's this sort of challenge yourself to use your academic skills in a practical way and then to use the tools, right? Whether it is free ChatGPT or say, I'm going to make the investment. I'm going to pay $20 a month to pay for Claude or ChatGPT, and I'm going to try to drive something. I think that is the thing that is going to break through because there's going to be all these people who graduated at the same time who all have no work experience. And if you can be like, yeah, I actually drove like 100,000 views of this thing and converted 5% of them, I think then you'll find someone who'll take a chance on you because then you'll show like your brain is working, you're switched on, you're hustling, and you're not just like you're not someone who has to be taken from the academic realm and brought into the real world. Like you are already forging your own path forward there.
And I think that's a really good mental model, right? Which is, I think what you're describing is like the top, let's just say 10% of folks who maybe they would have gone for a traditional status job like consulting, like I did, or banking or something like that. But I think there's an opportunity which is increasingly go towards tech because they use technology to amplify themselves. Top 10% there. Then I think the other top 40%, I think they are going to step up their game. I think they're going to do more internships. They're going to do what you just did. So I think for them, technology used to be a net plus.
Yeah.
I think the tricky part, I think, is the bottom 10% and the bottom 40%. I think the bottom 10% were always going to suffer because they were not motivated, and so forth. They were struggling for whatever set of reasons. I think they continue to struggle or struggle worse in this world. But I think the tier, right? I don't know, is it like, that 40% below average, I think they could have coasted, and I don't think allowed to coast.
Yeah. But I think there's also just like to think about what is your relative competitive advantage, right? Like I've always said this, which is Singaporeans actually, we're the most well-endowed people in this region from like a human capital perspective, right? Like we're the best educated in this region. We speak English. That should be like a huge asset. So it isn't that only jobs based here are the only thing available to you, right? Like with the internet, like you could do global jobs. You can run global businesses out of Singapore. And so then the question is like, can you motivate yourself to go do those things and find those things? And there are tons of SMEs in Singapore that struggle with productivity, adoption of technology and things like that. So can you go take over an SME and apply more efficiency and productivity to it? I think there's actually a lot of opportunity in the world, but it requires more effort than lobbing your resume in and interviewing and then
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think also people are concerned because they feel like they're also competing, like you said, across the region for that. And I think it's a little bit like people are concerned about the Johor, Singapore Special Economic Zone. We discussed that in prior podcasts.
yeah.
A lot of jobs are being moved by the banks, for example. Their back office and mid office jobs are being moved to Malaysia.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of concern as well. It's not just the AI side, but
Yeah.
also this offshoring of Singapore jobs.
This is everywhere, right? I think the Journal just had one, which is, hey, bankers were told, do you want to go to Salt Lake City or Dallas? Like moving people out of their high cost
Yeah.
offices
Yeah.
and a lot of mid and back office type of
Yeah.
roles. And so I think that's just the reality, right? Which is if your job can be done at the same quality or better at a lower cost in a lower cost location, it'll probably go there.
Yeah.
And so then the question for us is, what is the thing that we can uniquely do and do well? And I think you'd be happier too if you find the thing that you uniquely do well.
That's the big if, right? Because if you find it, then you're happier, even though it's painful for 6 months or a year searching for that job.
Yeah.
But I think this could be a part of it. I think people are concerned, what if they never find that job? Because it's structurally impossible. For example, I'm a copywriter and I studied for many years to be a writer, and now competing against AI and competing against
Yeah.
fractional freelance talent from the Philippines and Malaysia who are
Yeah.
charging half
Yeah.
or 1/3 or 1/4 the price because
Yeah.
of the cost of living difference. So it's a nightmare.
Yeah. I think other protected jobs are things that you want to do in person, right? Which
Yeah.
are like physical trainer,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can't offshore that right now.
massage therapist.
Yeah.
I have friends who use Zoom trainers, but I don't know. I still like the in person. I feel like in person, someone yelling at you in person is more powerful than someone yelling at you over Zoom. But also
Like-
correcting you, right? If you're not doing the thing correctly, I think it's much harder to correct over Zoom.
I agree. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think a personal trainer is a job that's in person. It's not outsourceable easily today yet.
Yeah.
And it's not automatable by AI.
Yeah. The
But
slots are a bit harder.
Yeah, but as a career advice, I can imagine, I think, I don't know, the government slogan is give up on your dreams, become a physical
100%.
trainer.
Oh,
You know.
No, but see, I think this is because people are like, I don't know what to say. They're a bit like elitist about white collar jobs versus what they perceive as like
Mm.
non-white collar jobs.
Right.
But personal trainers aren't cheap. Like, I think they actually make pretty good money.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are actually trained in physio, parahealth professionals
Right.
in terms of like their understanding of like recovery, athletic training, performance, all that sort of stuff. And I think as societies become wealthier, people spend more on health and wellness. It becomes, if you can't put food on the table, you're not like, oh, let me work on my VO2 max. But as people become, societies become wealthier, they spend more on recreation, but also on health and wellness. And so I think all of those professions that are related and in that orbit also become more well compensated. More
Yeah.
than a copywriter, I bet.
Okay, I get it. At least difference between what the government can say versus what you and I are saying is some reality of the market today. It's just imagining in my head, okay, I'm a parent. It's, okay, kid, I'm going to train you towards and I guess based on all this thinking, will be like, I'm going to focus you and train you to be a palliative care professional folks in person because Singapore is an aging society. And that could be like the outcome of how someone would
Interpret this
conversation, right?
I think it's less that, and it's more, at least the folks that I've met in this sort of sphere, a lot of them are like very keen sports people.
Yeah.
That's how they got into it, right? Like they were really keen sports people. They started to learn more about their personal performance, and then they started learning about muscles and ligament. Like that's how they got into it. And then at some point you realize, okay, I'm not going to be a professional athlete or whatever it is. And you're like, okay, like what's next for me? How do I take this and turn my interests, my passions into a career? And maybe you start out and you're like, okay, I'm like a PT, but then there's people who are like, oh, then I built a gym, right? I built software. I like for my gym. I think there's this sort of more like entrepreneurial way to think about it versus it's not like a top down, like the government's, we must now all become personal trainers, right? Of course not. But I think there's this notion of, hey, we should actually all become attuned to what our market needs that match up with our passions.
Yeah.
And how do we have the agency to identify those and say, let's go try something and do it. I think that's where versus if you study this, you'll be fine. Like everybody study computer science.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky part, right? Is for all jobs, education, employment. At some level, the state is supposed to look, 20 years, not 30 years on the road because education is paid for by the government on behalf of taxpayers on average.
So this is an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Given what we are talking about, how should education change?
Use more AI and computers.
No. I mean,
That could be one suggestion.
I guess it could be. I don't know if that's the answer.
You get an iPad, everybody gets
Yeah.
an iPad. That was a push, I'll say about 7 years ago in terms of the digitalization. It was iPad time, for example.
I think I'm really fixated on this idea of like agency, which is that I think we should increasingly push kids to drive their learning agendas. So rather than be like, okay, this is a statistics module or whatever it is, right? I think it should be like, okay, here's a big data set of youth unemployment. Let's make it. Here's the data set of youth unemployment over the last 10 years. Use what you learned in your statistics class, based on what you learned in your statistics class, analyze this data set, and make a series of recommendations. I think we have to push people to like actually get in the habit of, okay, I'm seeing a situation. How do I marshal the resources I do have to figure out what's going on here and make a plan, make a recommendation, and then have that interaction. Okay, if this is your policy recommendation, what happens next? What are the outputs? What would happen? I think that's actually more interesting. Or, okay, you've learned this set of, I don't know, biology or chemistry or whatever it is. Now you and Claude and you and ChatGPT go figure out some use cases for this learning. More open-ended stuff that actually forces people to use tools to drive an outcome rather than test you on knowing something. You doing recall on something is almost going to be worthless.
That's how a lot of our exams are, right? What is the mitochondria cycle? And
yeah, but so more like, given what you know about the mitochondria cycle, right? How might you apply that to XYZ problem?
Yeah, I'm just imagining like some systems person like myself is being like, how do you assess that fairly? Isn't that more workload than teachers in the system?
Sure. But like at the end of the day, to your point, if we're going to spend public tax dollars on people's education, then we should actually endeavor to give them skills that are useful to growing GDP, right? To their marginal productivity. Not just about, oh, now I can rank you from 1 to 40,000.
I think what's interesting is that I think that recently the Singapore government just announced that they are reducing the number of subjects that are needed for the junior college assignment from 6 subjects down to 5 subjects to allow people to focus more. So I think it's an interesting piece, but I think part of it they're saying is if you, instead of trying everybody to be a generalist and good at multiple subjects, maybe a less, breadth, people to
more
focus
depth.
on. Yeah, they have more depth or pursue the passions they want. Or maybe there's a bunch of non-academic pursuits they want to achieve that they have just by studying one subject. So it's an interesting movement.
Yeah. I just feel like we need people to have more open-ended problems they solve earlier in life so they can gain that habit, but also that confidence that they can do it. So I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I ran a project at a local bank. I had a team of very bright local university students. And the prompt was something like design new products for the bank. And each team was like a group of university students, and they all had a mentor, like an industry mentor. That was like the role that I was playing. And they were like, I think 3rd-year students, and they were all in finance or business, super bright. And it was very funny because at the beginning, it felt like they were like waiting for me to tell them what the answer is. And I was like, I don't know what that's the prompt. I don't know what the answer is. If we knew the answer, we wouldn't even be here. We actually have to think about like what makes a great new product for the bank. Like, why do we think that? What questions will we ask? And these were all like, these people all went on and worked at bulge bracket banks after this, right? Like I did follow them after that. But it was interesting that was like their default setting was like, okay, adult in the room, tell us what to do. And I really feel like that has to change.
It reminds me of the book like Lord of the Flies. Everybody's figure out how to live on a tropical island together. So now it's like Lord of the AI Flies. Like all the youth today must figure out their own approach to surviving in a world of AI and so forth. I guess I'm always a little bit more conservative on public education because I think at the end of the day, public education is about teaching entirety of society. So it's always a bit of a lowest common denominator component, right? It's always going to be something that's by its nature of regimentation, structure, it's always going to be good for 90% of society, right? And to some extent, it's never going to be good for.
But why would an agency be good for 90% of society?
Oh, I think there are 2 answers. Because like, do we really want to raise all our kids an agency?
Yes.
You say you're Confucianism, you're Asian, you're communitarian,
Those are not mutually exclusive.
I can see that. I can see that. I'm not trying to disagree with you, but like, you really want everybody to have agency. As a parent, I want my child to have agency.
Yeah, until they start doing something you don't agree with.
That's the point.
They're like, damn it, they have too much agency.
That's exactly the point. Sorry. Teaching people to have agency means that they are much more able to make their own choices. And a lot of people think they make better choices than what children or teenagers or youth can do. And so as long as so people are saying, I'm happy to have you have agency as long as you make decisions that align with me or are neutral to me.
I think it's an interesting point, right? Which is part of it is around like values alignment. So when you talk about like Confucianism, communitarianism, things like that, I do think that's important. Actually, that's something that I do think that as a whole, we are stronger than. I think a purely individual approach is not what I would advocate.
Yeah.
But I do think that passivity, especially in this era, is detrimental to our society. That is like my deeply held belief, which is we need to raise people, we need to educate people in a way that's like gives them the skills, but also the shared values, right? Around what does it mean to be a citizen of a small country?
Yeah.
And what are our obligations to each other? But also, what are our obligations as citizens to be informed, right? To be aware. That takes active work. It's not just, oh, let me just complain about this thing I don't like. So there's this great children's book that my kids have, and it's called Someone Had to Build the Dream. Beautifully illustrated. And it's basically a picture book where they go through like cool things like a roller coaster or a fountain, like different things. And they explain all the people who had to do work to make it happen. And it rhymes, right? And basically the whole thing, and basically the refrain is someone had to build a dream. And I really like it because it's everything that you see like around you, someone had to put a lot of bloody effort into it. And so it's like when you are not happy with something, you think there's an alternative, then like you have to be like, okay, what would it take to make that happen? How do I like put that into motion? Don't just sit around and complain. Like I just feel like that attitude, if you think about, I don't know, like what are they, the Merdeka or the Pioneer generation? Whoever,
Yeah.
LKY's generation or
Yeah.
whatever. They're not like, oh, woe is me. They're kind of like, oh man, we gotta go do something. So that spirit, I feel like, is that story that we need to like tell more. And I think that's important. I think it's essential to our survival, actually.
I think to wrap things up here would be that I think I agree with you. And I think that teaching agency is good. And I think if you don't teach agency, then effectively you're letting passive people continue being passive. If you ask me, does Jeremy Al believe in that? I believe that you should teach agency. It's just that I can just empathize with the system folks who are like, but what if they make bad choices?
That's part of being human. That's part of learning.
That's like going all the way back to like Adam and Eve, and the Bible says they gave them free choice and they made a bad choice, which is why they had to eat Eden. And there's so many other origin religious stories, which is like order is good. Humans choose to be chaotic and bad decisions that cause everything. But that's what makes them human. There's a yin and yang for our society, right? People want to be agency and have free will, but we also want them to make good choices all the time, such as life. On that note, let's wrap this up and say thank you so much, Shiyan, for sharing.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.